Tim here with Everyday Tactical Vids, and we are looking at the K-Bar BK2 today. I got this as a survival knife because I've had my hands on lots of different knives over the years, and I wanted to get something that was really big, really sturdy, very beefy, and could just take a serious beating. So that's why I picked up this guy. It's going to run you between $60 and $80 depending on where you get it. And let me take it out of the box, show you the knife, some of the stuff you get with it, talk through some of the specs, and then we'll take it out into the field and use it a bit. In the box, you just get a couple of basic things. First, you can see this paperwork, and it's actually not a ton about the BK2, more about K-Bar, a little bit of the history. So that's one piece of information. You get the sheath, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a moment. And then you actually get the knife here, and as you can see, it is shipped to you with this paper on to keep the blade safe. And then when you take this off, that's what the blade looks like. Let's talk about the sheath first. The harder part of the sheath is made of a black glass-filled nylon. You can see it says BK and K-Bar there. You got these 4 screws. If you do take that off, you'll basically remove this section and also this webbing, which is where the knife, the handle of the knife will go up here, and then this will clip around the handle. This is held in by just one rivet on the inside. Now you can run your belt through this, obviously, and then you'll have the knife on your belt. There has been some discussion I've heard with some folks when I first started looking at this knife about, this is definitely a high density, high quality plastic, and then you've got something a little more flimsy up here. So when I first started looking at this, a guy at the local sporting goods outdoor store said that some people get custom sheaths made for the BK2. So that certainly is an option. This, I would say, is quite solid. And if you're going to be throwing this guy in a bag or in a pack, you can certainly take this guy off. If you do want to put it on a belt, you can do that as well. And this does clip nicely around the actual handle of the blade. So let me show you what that looks like with the knife actually in the sheath, and then we'll look at the knife up close and personal. Here's what the knife looks like when it's in the sheath. It is quite solid. Once it's in, it locks into place very nicely. I'll talk about how it actually gets that really solid retention in a moment. But if you wanted to, what you could do was stitch, basically, measure the width of your belt and then do some stitching right across here. Then you'd have less movement. So when it's on your belt, you don't have all this space where your belt is moving, but you could just have, basically your belt running through here. So to take it out, you can see there's some, looks like a little jimping there almost, but you're going to put your thumb there and then press very firmly. And this thing is very secure when it's in this part of the sheath. So just really push and give it a tug, and then the BK2 will actually come out. On to speaking about the knife specifically. Blade length about 5 1/4 to 5.5 inches, and total length about 10.5, maybe just a little bit more than that for your total end-to-end length of the knife. Let me get this out of the way here. I'll tell you something that's very impressive about the knife is the thickness of the blade. So I'll pick this up here and show it to you. It's about 1/4 inch thick, so very sturdy, thick knife. Comparing this to another blade here, this is one of my cold steel Tough Lights. I mean, you can see it is just notably larger than that. So this is going to take a serious beating and keep on working great. This would be an excellent knife, as you'll see when we get out into the field, for things such as batoning or any other real hard use like that. So that's one of the reasons I got this guy, again, just because of the sheer size of the blade when it comes to thickness. A couple other details here. Your steel is a 1095 Grossman, and your handle is Grivery. You can see you've got these 3, picking it up again here for you, these 3 bolts that go through the handle to the other side, and you can pop that off and replace your handle if you want to do that as well. One of the things that people note about this knife, and some of them love it about it and some of them are concerned about it, but your weight, it's 14.6 ounces. So definitely a heavy knife. If weight is a concern for you, this may not be a great knife for you, but again, very sturdy. Down on here on the end, you can see you got this pommel here, so if you want to drive a tent stake, or if you had to break something with that, you could certainly use this built into the knife. It's part of the steel and full-tang, as you can see. One more thing to tell you is that it does have a hole here. If you want to put some paracord, you need to hang it or something like that. But there's a look at the BK2 here in the studio. Now let's take it outside and use it a bit and see how it functions. So you've seen the review in the basement. Now we'll talk about the BK2 out here in the woods. First thing I want to show you is actually taking it out of the sheath. It is, as it comes from the factory, very, very secure. So let me just show you my attempt, at least, to take it out of the sheath here. So unsnap this, and then that does, obviously, as you see, let it move quite free. So I'm going to put my thumb on the pressure point you're supposed to push down on, and it does take quite a bit to get it out of the sheath. I've usually got a couple of different tests I think about when it comes to a survival knife. The first one is, can you just chop with it? Not baton with it, but just chop with it. Does it have enough heft to it that I can actually do that? So I'm going to show you here on this, this dead tree what it looks like to actually just chop with the BK2. Absolutely, it passes that test. This guy has enough weight and heft that you can really do some significant chopping with it. Now, batoning is a much more popular way when it comes to actually splitting wood, and I'll show you how that works in a second. But after the chopping test, next test for me is generally, how well does it cut if I have to, say, shave something down to a point. Let's take a look at that. Test number 2, here we go. So I would definitely say it passes that test as well. Now, the disadvantage I'm going to say about a larger blade like this is that you don't get that real fine. To get fine shavings, it does take a little bit more work. Whereas when you have a thinner blade than the BK2, you can do that with a little bit easier. Overall, you're not just talking about one use, you're talking about multiple uses. So can you chop with this guy? Can you hammer, with it? Can you do some fine work? I would generally say that if I was going to use this as a survival knife, I would like to have a second smaller knife with a very fine point on it. I actually keep this guy in my survival bag, and what I have is a knife for doing fine work is one of the cold steel tough lights, and it's got just a very sharp small blade. So if I needed to field dress something that was really small, that a big beefy blade like this was going to be basically too much for the job, I would use that thing. So so far passes the test. Obviously no issues with it. I would tell you if there are any chips in the blade or anything like that. Next thing we'll do is work on some batoning. Got this piece of wood that I was just shaving some of the end off of to show you how the blade worked. Now we're going to actually use this piece of wood as the baton, and we'll cut this piece of wood down here. One thing that a lot of people think about when they hear the word batoning is splitting up wood for a fire. So what I'm going to do is I've got a stump here behind me. It's already split, but I'll baton it quite a bit to break it into a bunch of different pieces just to show you how that process works as well. Now, while I probably wouldn't use that stump as firewood, the main goal of this is just to show you that I'm not hesitant at all as I'm beating on this thing. I'm not, wondering if I hit it in the wrong spot, is it going to break? It's just such sturdy metal and so nicely made that, yeah, I would definitely, there are other survival knives, other even full-tang knives that I've used that I think, I'm not sure I want to baton a ton with that. With this guy, I feel like I would do it all day and not have any concern. In conclusion, as we look at the BK2, overall, major thumbs up from Everyday Tactical Vids. Let's talk about the negatives first, and then we'll talk about the positives. Really, the main negative that I can think of is the sheath. I like the harder portion of the plastic on the sheath. If they had something that was a bit more solid, some sort of complete polymer sheath, that would be best. Not crazy about the webbing. I do understand why they've designed it that way as far as giving it a little bit more flexibility in movement, but when I first started looking at the BK2, the guy at the local outdoor store said that's some feedback they've gotten, is that some people don't like the sheath. So I would agree with that. Definitely not a deal breaker. The other downside, which also ends up being an upside, but it's the size of the blade. So if you want to do real fine work, this is going to be a little bit hard to operate with. I mean, even if you do choke way up on it and you're trying to do detail work, the blade is so thick that that can make it quite difficult. On the positive side, the size of the blade. So that thickness, the full-tang, just the heft of it, you can really use this item, use this knife aggressively, and I have no concern about it breaking. Second thing is to say, it is, BK and K bar, so that's a high quality company that if you have issues with it, you can, call them, contact them, and I'm sure they'll work with you. The other thing to say is that it's not super expensive. Some of those high-end survival knives out there just cost you a ton of money. Depending on where you get it, you're talking a $30 range, but you're not talking over $100 from pretty much any place I've seen it. So that's quite reasonable for such a strong knife. It does keep an edge quite well, and overall I would say if you're in the market for a survival blade, don't want to spend a lot of money, this might be one of the best knives out there. I'm going to say right now, when it comes to survival blades that I've used and that I feel very confident with, this is actually going to be at the top of the list at this point. So highly recommend it. I've actually got 2 of these guys, so I definitely am a believer in them. And just a reminder, if you want to swap out the handles, you could do that. Still got that full-tang. Pop out those 3 bolts, put on a new, different design for your handle, and you're good to go. So, as always, guys, thanks for checking out the video. Please subscribe, like the video, tell your friends about Everyday Tactical Vids. We're always doing reviews, time at the range, Everyday Tactical Vids worldview videos as well. So check back often, and we'll see you guys soon.